Welcome to the Seraphine podcast. I'm Seraphine Arocha, and today we are sitting down with Brady Hester. Hello.
Hello.
I wanted to do an episode today because I've had so many people ask me about what it takes to put on a podcast. And I have a lot of friends who've done the podcast with me and they got the itch. And it's been a year and you've joined our team. Brady is my marketing guru. He's the one who's kind of helped me hone in what the Seraphine podcast is. And I wanted to kind of share my journey into being a podcaster, what I've learned, and we're gonna kind of dig deep. We've got a 3-part series for you. So if you're interested in podcasting, I guarantee you're gonna have some really great nuggets of information. So this first part of the series, we're calling it Riches Are in the Niches, or niches if you like to say it with a little bit of flair. So I kind of want to start out by talking about this thing that happens where people get the bug to start a podcast. So what do you find? Who do you find that wants to start a podcast? Like, who's come to you?
Yeah, so there have been a few. I mean, really any brand could potentially start a podcast because every brand that wants to build a presence online needs some form of content, right? Mm-hmm. So it's potentially a possibility for anybody. And so some health and fitness related companies, myself, you know, that, and it's a great way to build a presence because you can start with creating that long form of content and then dice it up through social media. And there's so many different possibilities for it of really allowing people to get to know you. So it's, you know, it's a great platform. It's fun to be a part of.
I guess the why and the purpose is always so interesting because I still kind of find the questioning of like, well, why am I doing this? When I first started out, me and Aaron, my producer, had been working on a previous podcast that was called the Healthy Me podcast. And it was basically interviewing people in the health and fitness industry. And it was pretty basic. It had like, you know, a fast action round of questions, but it was kind of get to know you. And what I enjoyed about podcasting was I loved the interview part. I thought it was really cool to talk to people and learn about people. The problem with that was that, you know, you start to lend your platform to the guest, and then you're really not the focal point. And not that you have to be the focal point, but to make something marketable and have a loyal listening group, you do have to. I mean, you really helped me with that. And why do you think, I don't know, why do you think I had such a hard time with it? Like, I mean, honestly, I'm wondering.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and going back to your why, it kind of depends why you want to get into it in the first place. But I mean, for the most part, especially if you don't have a name out there already, you definitely need to put yourself out there more. And in your case, you know, I mean, you had great guests, but the unfortunate part is the audience really didn't get to know you as much because you're so great at showcasing your guests, which, you know, has some value too because you want to show that you have awesome guests on, but at the same time, you want to build up your name and your personality, and then guests will stick with you no matter what guest, or sorry, your audience will stick with you no matter what guest.
Yeah.
So that's crucial
time.
for longevity. It's super important.
Yeah, and it was interesting because at the time, you know, we started it during, you know, the COVID and, you know, during all of the social upheaval with George Floyd. And I had that real sense of like, oh, how do I have a podcast about me? You know, like I felt kind of weird about it. And you start to understand that there has to be a balance of sharing the platform, getting to know people, bringing information, having conversation, but also offering a little bit of yourself, if not a lot of yourself. And I've realized more people are interested in the content when you put yourself out there and it's not so generic.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Have you gotten used to putting yourself out there at this point, getting almost a year into it?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely have my moments to where, I realized when I talked about my family, I realized when I was talking about my feelings on social justice, my conversations with Dr. Auburn, when I'm across from somebody who I perceive has more knowledge, I think that that's where I get a little insecure when it comes to being highly opinionated and realizing that you have a little bit of a backlash, from people. That can be really vulnerable. But then, the thing I've just wanted to make sure is that I don't hurt anyone. So I've tried to state my opinion, even when I've made reference to, stories of my own life, family members, whatever. I'm so conscious now of, well, are they listening? And also trying to put out a true opinion, right? So
Yeah.
it's a balancing act, but I'm learning how to get more comfortable with it. And I don't know, it's more exciting to put your opinion out there and then have people say, actually, you should think twice about that, because you start to learn and grow. I think that's important right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny you bring that up because whenever I've podcasted, it's funny. I really only ever care what my family thinks of it. When I don't even know if they listen. It's just a funny thing. I don't think they care.
It's so true. My parents actually have a heart, I think maybe they've put it on for a few minutes, but they're so scared. I was like, all right, well, they're really not listening, so I guess I'm just going to go for it. So, as we're talking about this, so you want to start a podcast, you have to think about your why and your purpose. And I will tell you, it's not as easy as you think it is. And a lot of times you're gonna find yourself in your podcast during a certain kind of a period of time, and sometimes you'll need to pivot, and that's okay. It's trying new things. So then I think that the next thing you really need to think about is, what are the interests, the topics? What are the things that you're going to talk about? When you see successful podcasts, what is your advice in terms of honing in? Because I have so many interests. I have so many topics I want to talk about. What do you advise to hone it in?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the number one thing when it comes to topics and interests is authenticity. If you don't care about it, your audience won't care about it, because it's super obvious if you're watching that, oh, she's not even into it. Why would I want to be into it?
Yeah.
So, that's a little bit of an experimental thing. I recommend getting into any topic or interest in the first place, and then it kind of just happens over time and organically what you can actually talk about over long periods of time and what your audience resonates with.
So true. And if you don't have the knowledge background, like for me, when I first sat down with Dr. Auburn, I was in over my head. I always make the joke, she had me basically go to college because I read her dissertation, about 60 pages of it. And that I was looking up words like pedagogy, going, what the hell does this mean? So I think, and it's funny because a year has gone by and I've learned more. I've spent more time with her, and it's getting your footing. I feel like I had colt legs in the beginning, but also understanding when you aren't the expert on the topic or the interest, you have to really understand on how to do your research. Do you want to keep bringing this topic up again in your podcast? Because it's a scary thing if you aren't the expert on it, or if it's something you're extremely passionate about.
Yeah, that's so true. There are only a few people I feel like Joe Rogan being the big example of having guests on that he has little to no background on, and he's purely an interviewer. Otherwise, I would highly recommend bringing on guests, if you're going to do guests, on topics that you're at least somewhat familiar with, so there can be some back and forth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's pretty tough, and if you're jumping topics all the time, it's hard to find the right audience for it, and they're a little confused about what you're about, which doesn't, in general, help you build that audience and that core group of fans.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think now I've really started to understand who my audience is. And that's the next topic we're kind of putting in under this riches are in the niches episode. The audience is interesting because you really have to give it some time. I think that when you first come out, unless you're somebody who has established themselves in a certain career, whether it's financial, whether it is, you're a personality, if you're an actor, actress, if you're a brand person, I think it's interesting to see when you come onto the mic. A lot of times you may think people are interested in you. That would be your main core audience. And then you realize they are so not your audience. And it's a little humbling because I came in thinking, I would be drawing a bunch of listeners that were friends of mine, that are on Instagram or Facebook, and they gave me barely the time of day. I was like, please listen to my podcast. So what's your advice when people are trying to find their audience? Mine is patience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one. And this is where riches and niches really comes into play, because you might think that people go on YouTube and just randomly come across podcasts, but that's really not the case, because they're often looking for a very specific topic that they're interested in. So if you can hammer home great shows in that same topic over and over, you continually come up for people.
Yeah.
But if you're all over the place, you're not going to come up on anybody's feeds because you're not an expert in any given topic. So the more you can tighten that up, it's crucial.
That was something I learned majorly from you, because I had so many different guests in so many different areas of expertise. And, what I realized was what I love to do is I love to talk about film. I like to talk about art. I like to talk about how it relates to our social climate. And I really found this beautiful little pivot in the podcast where I was like, oh, I can talk about these things, and I don't always have to have a guest. I can bring on the people who are my friends, like Aaron, who helps me produce it, and he's behind the camera, or Chelsea, So it's pretty cool to have that realization of your audience, because it usually has to do with, again, what you're most interested in, what you know about, So,
Yeah.
And what you're learning about can be something, but you have to be patient, with yourself on your learning curve of presenting the information that's new.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cool thing is, if you're interested in something, other people are interested in it as well.
Yeah.
So going back to authenticity, you're into it, your audience is into it, then it's just about finding that audience and getting them to your show, which we'll get into in the third part of the series, but
yeah,
it makes the marketing job easier.
So the fourth one that we're going to talk about is pitfalls. So if you have no niche and you've got inconsistencies, it's just like coming up in that quote unquote algorithm of, if someone is looking up a certain topic and you're all over the board, it's so important to figure out what it is that you keep coming back to. What is the common thread? And making sure that, even if it's off topic, that it filters into a certain category. I think that, recently I just started doing a top 7 that you gave me advice on. And it's a fun way of talking about multiple topics, but putting it under kind of a manageable certain amount of time and accessible. People can listen to it quickly. Where else do you think people can kind of address multiple topics, but be consistent in their message?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it does come back to that video format. If you establish up front, whether through a title or an intro, what the audience can expect, they know ahead of time whether it's something they want to buy into or not. And if you can put it under some label like that, like a top 7,
Or the hot
anything,
wings, right? The hot ones,
Yeah.
right? So he's got so many different guests, but it is under this umbrella that is consistent. You know, every time someone comes on the show, they're going to eat those hot wings and they are going to try and answer questions, and they're probably going to be crying or snotting out of their nose.
Yeah, it's so funny.
It's good stuff.
Or even like, you know, there's some really good lifestyle channels out there, and you could talk about anything under lifestyle, but people, you know, they know they're coming to you for something somewhat specific, and it's kind of all under that umbrella.
Yeah. So the fifth one is kind of advice to those starting out. So, I mean, for me, I have to say my advice to anyone starting out is make sure that you know what podcasting is. So in the beginning, I thought like it was all under the social media umbrella. I was kind of putting podcasting with YouTube channels, with Instagramming, with Facebooking, and it's so different. Every single thing is different. Even the timestamps of what people listen to is so different on a podcast than what it is on a YouTube channel. And also you have to think about the cadence of what you're talking about, your voice pattern. You have to talk in ways to where if people aren't seeing you, like this is an audio visual podcast, a lot of times I have to go into my headspace and go, wait a second, if I'm talking fashion, they're not physically seeing what I'm wearing. So I have to go into heavy description of material, of you know, what the colors look like, things like that. It's so important to understand that what people listen to is so short term. Like visually, I think your attention span might hang in there a little bit longer, but even audio visual, when we're doing this, Aaron and I have worked a lot about camera angles, the fact that just sitting across from someone for 10 or 15 minutes is boring. So now we have B-roll, but then we have to understand that the B-roll also goes into the podcast streaming. So it's kind of crazy. But that's my biggest piece of advice is really understand where you want to go with it, and do you understand what podcasting is? Because I think a lot of people have an idea of what it is, and then they're like, oh. So what do you think in terms of advice to those starting out?
I mean, if you're really interested in it, just start. And at the beginning, it's going to suck. Don't worry about it. Because there's so many little nuances to it that, I mean, I would have to put a list together and it'd probably be a whole book.
Yeah.
But it's better to just get out there and try it for yourself.
Yeah.
And just understand it's going to be tough at first, because it's not as easy as just
Getting
flipping on a
mic,
camera, getting on a mic.
Yeah.
There's so much that goes into it, and it's one of those things that over time you add a little wrinkle in here, a little upgrade here, and the next thing you know, a year into it, you're a well-oiled machine, and you can get moving.
100%. Well, I hope this first segment in this 3-part series with Brady is kind of opening up your eyes on what it takes to podcast, and what it takes to actually put content out there. Please, if you like this, please click like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff, and leave your comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, and part 2's coming right up.